A question tonight, can you actually measure the emotional outpouring in a worldwide crisis?
Sometimes scientists think that they have done just that. Their machines and computers found a bizarre pattern right after several global disasters.
Most people have heard of the random number generator studies through the Global Consciousness Project.
Because there is this resonant effect through the force, if you want to look at it that way, through this entangled, interwoven consciousness field.
Emotional focus of millions of people on a single event like 9/11 may form a global consciousness.
We are consciousness, infinite awareness, having an experience. And that consciousness can be as vast as or as tiny as we can be manipulated.
They knew the science of consciousness is real.
Does consciousness interact directly with the physical world?
To answer that question, Dr. Nelson and his colleagues deployed dozens of instruments around the world, random number generators.
And then on 9/11, it begins not being a drunkard's walk. It goes like this for 2 days.
It may sound bizarre, but Dr. Nelson and his team have been at this for the better part of a decade. The first spike showed up in 1997 with the death of Princess Diana. Other events like the Concorde crash, the Madrid train bombing, and the Pope's funeral all registered on those random number generators. But early on the morning of September 11th, the data went off the charts.
In the 1990s, Roger Nelson at Princeton got the idea that maybe intention was only a piece of the puzzle and maybe attention was also important. That the act of attending, which when we think of internally, attending is a kind of coherent mental state. You're focusing in on one thing. And if we can think of that as not simply being in your head, but being out there as well, then when you attend to something, it changes. And it changes in the direction of coherence. So if the target of your attention is randomness, then a cohered random system is, by definition, more orderly, becomes ordered.
Today, there are over 60 random event generators placed around the world. The numbers that come into the generators during normal random events for global consciousness are just that, random.
Jeff Scargill, a research astrophysicist with NASA, admires the team's use of scientific method, but questions its results.
It's finding patterns in random data. The nature of randomness is that any pattern that you want to choose ahead of time will eventually show up, and just as an accident.
It could happen by chance, but the chance is like 1 in a million or 1 in some really large number.
How does it work, and what does it all mean? Even the scientists don't know. The implications go beyond science into philosophy and religion. All we know is this: at this very moment, around the globe, the random number generators keep flipping those virtual coins, waiting to record our collective reaction to the next major world event.
In 1997, I started doing something which turned into what we now call the Global Consciousness Project, which is looking at the entire world in a way, using our same kind of technology we developed in the lab.
So he started doing experiments where he'd take a random number generator, an electronic circuit, and put it in the vicinity of a group that was meditating, thinking that this would create a large amount of coherent attention. Sometimes people knew the random generator was there, and sometimes they didn't know. And he wanted to see whether the randomness would become orderly during the meditation. And after hundreds of such tests by Roger and me and a bunch of our colleagues, we came to the conclusion that it does become less random in a context where we can infer that there's mental coherence going on, sometimes due only to attention.
On September 11th, a few hours before the first plane struck, this network of random number generators became more coherent, less random and more coherent.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers, huge.
In the case of the September 11th World Trade Center attacks in New York, the REGs measured a warning spike 4 hours in advance of the first plane strike and continued measuring the ensuing events and public reactions. Deep feelings of compassion enveloped the world, and a 50-hour trend ensued in the data, reflecting the profound effects of the event itself.
After 9/11, working with Princeton University and some other researchers, what they began to find is that there was a large spike in the magnetic fields of the Earth during 9/11 that is now attributed to the mass collective outpouring of heart-based emotion from hundreds of millions of people who witnessed the tragedy. There are 2 satellites over the northern hemisphere. Every 30 minutes they send back a signal telling scientists how strong this magnetic field of the Earth is. It's important because all life is connected to it. There is no them and us when it comes to the magnetic field of every CEO of every corporation, every leader of every nation, every blade of grass, every hamster, every goldfish, every human is linked to this field. So what happens, the field is important. And what scientists found is 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 15 minutes after the first plane hit the first tower, there was a very unusual spike in the strength of the magnetic fields of the Earth attributed to the collective outpouring of human emotion, heart-based emotion, the strongest magnetic generator in the body.
Several hours in advance of a major world event, non-random, coherent numbers are present. A large spike in the data waveform appears, giving a precognition that a major event is about to occur.
I mean, it all devolves back into the question, what is the role of mind in the physical world? From a Western science point of view, there isn't much. I mean, I as a designer of a car, can get an internal image and an intention to build a car, and eventually a car appears. But that's not a direct link. It requires a lot of work between the intention and the building of a car. But this question is saying more that, is there a direct link between one's intention and the behavior of the world? But an unmediated link, or if mediated, we don't know by what yet.
For half a century, Yitzhak Rabin risked his life to defend his country. Today, he gave his life to bring it a lasting peace.
Hours before the November 4th, 1995 assassination of Nobel Peace Prize winner, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, a continuous running REG saw a major spike developing, which peaked at the time of his murder, reflecting the loss of a true peacemaker and a man of compassion.
The question is, can you create that effect without having near tragedy? Can you create it at will? And this has led the Institute of Heart Math to create a project that is called Global Coherence Initiative. Personal coherence is good, global coherence is really good.
We, the children of Earth, have a responsibility to develop our own consciousness and understanding to be people of universal peace from this planet. And if we take care of that, the rest will be taken care of.
If you have a golf ball-sized consciousness, when you read a book, you'll have a golf ball-sized understanding. When you look out, a golf ball-sized awareness. And when you wake up in the morning, a golf ball-sized wakefulness. But if you could expand that consciousness, then you read the book, more understanding. You look out, more awareness. And when you wake up, more wakefulness. It's consciousness. And there's an ocean of pure, vibrant consciousness inside each one of us. And it's right at the source and base of mind, right at the source of thought, and it's also at the source of all matter.
On a graph, these phenomena show up as spikes, such as this one. And here is where this all gets very interesting. The date of this spike is September 11th, 2001. Just a coincidence? Well, how about this spike?
Oh my God!
December 26th, 2005. Or this one. April 8th, 2006. In all, dozens of world events, according to project scientists, are linked to the random number generators acting in a very unrandom-like way.
The deepest mystery we can explore is the mystery of consciousness. Do our thoughts and feelings begin and end in our brain? Or are they part of a larger tapestry, one that connects us to everyone and everything in ways we are just beginning to understand?
They're able to actually, for the first time, they're able to actually observe the human relationship between the magnetic fields of the Earth and when we're influencing those fields in very specific ways. Then they went back and looked at the data and said, does this only happen when bad things are present? And the answer was no. Super Bowl Sunday, the whole world is watching, and it's influencing the magnetic fields of the Earth. The funeral of Princess Diana, the whole world came together.
The September 6, 1997 funeral of Princess Diana yielded a major signal in the data. Global compassion following tragedy of major world figures or world loss of life yielded the strongest spikes in the data.
If something like Princess Diana's funeral was bringing 2 billion people to think about the same thing and maybe feel sadness or compassion together, that we should try to see whether our machines, our random event generators, could detect that, could react to it. So in that particular case, I asked all of my colleagues and friends who did the same kind of research, please take data. We had several lines of data in Europe, several lines of data in this country, put them all together, and remarkably enough, or maybe not so surprising if you believe the data from the laboratory experiments, we have a big, strong effect. If you did the same thing 100 times, you wouldn't see the size of change in our REG devices that we saw during the time of the funeral of Princess Diana.
We later had another instance where Princess Diana was killed in a car crash, and her funeral was scheduled a week in advance. So we figured we can use that as another example of lots of attention around the world for one event. And we got, I think, 12 of us around the world got our random number generators going, and we analyzed the result, and again, was significant deviation from randomness towards order during the period of the funeral, when lots of people were watching. And we thought, well, this is great. This is an interesting experiment, but we had to go through a lot of work to get everybody to participate at the same time.
Ever been to a concert or sporting event where the atmosphere was electric, almost like there was something more than just the event going on in the room, something connecting everyone there? Well, there are scientists out there trying to prove what you felt actually was something real. As NBC 11's Garvin Thomas shows us, it's a global experiment taking place in part right here in the Bay Area.
Some of the reality TV programs, believe it or not, the whole world stops what they're doing. They want to see who the bachelor chooses as his bride because they love a love story, you know. But the point is, it doesn't take something bad, it's something big. And when many people can come together, tuning their hearts through what we would call positive emotions of care, gratitude, appreciation, we create a collective field that is scientifically documented now.
The thinking is, there is something which connects all our minds, a global consciousness, if you will. And on 9/11, for example, instead of everyone concentrating on different or random things, we all focused on the same thing. That non-random pattern in the global consciousness is then somehow registered by the eggs.
The next step, though, is the one that people mostly question. Because if inside our heads we are exploiting that gap, it means that we have quantum development in the system which takes us to a level somewhat beyond present technology in our experiments. The experiments still support quantum mechanics, and we have not yet seen where something new has to come in. But there are good reasons, in my opinion, when we look at going back to these two major revolutions of 20th century physics, quantum mechanics on the one hand, Einstein's theory of general relativity, space-time is not flat, it's curved, gravity is not a force, it's somehow a curvature. There is something quite different from other kinds of physics going on there. If you bring these two great theories together, we see this conflict suggests strongly that there must be a change in the rules of quantum mechanics at a certain level. And that certain level is not too unreasonable that it should be relevant in the brain.
Oh, by the way, the reason we did this is because we knew that events would occur that we couldn't predict, and that would attract a lot of attention. We wanted to see what would happen under those cases.
I think we are destined to either become this layer of intelligence for the Earth, collaborating to do the job that we are best fit to do, which is monitor and enable and protect the Earth, which is the home we have, the only home.
The Global Consciousness Network has scientific data showing similar responses to many world events, such as Earth Day and World Healing events. Major earthquakes reflect in the data hours in advance of the actual earthquakes, showing that the global consciousness field is not limited to what human beings directly perceive.
This is one of now over 200 such events. Things like gigantic tsunamis, earthquakes, political events, the death of celebrities, unexpected things. Those kind of events go into our database. And what we do then is we have this ongoing, continuous random stream from around the world. We have a formal way of saying, well, this event is either predicted or an event occurs, and we go back later and we analyze the result through a standard method that we use. And we can see whether this worldwide random system is behaving randomly or not. And when you look at composite over the 200-some events, the odds against chance are over 1,000,000 to 1 now.
Organizers say, however, the GCP is not about predicting the future. It is about understanding ourselves and our world. Because the project is still in the early stages, they say they will need much more data and many more world-changing events before they reach any mind-changing conclusions.
So we have good statistical reasons to believe that the random generators are not behaving randomly when there are large-scale events that attract a lot of attention. At this point, we don't know then which direction the arrow of causation goes. We don't know whether it's simply a lot of human minds that are somehow changing randomness, or whether this is a reflection of something bigger, something like a collective mind, of which the collective mind attends to something, and collective mind includes everything else, including what we think of as matter and energy. And so the attention, the change that we see in randomness may be the same in some way. It's the same kind of organizing event that changes random events. It also changes our attention. But again, I don't know which direction the arrow of causation goes, and maybe it's so complex there is no single arrow. Maybe some giant system of some type.
To be a field where people are less aggressive, more willing to cooperate to solve their problems, and if we were ever going to do that at a time on the planet, I think right now is a really good time to do that.
Because there is this resonant effect through the force, if you want to look at it that way, through this entangled, interwoven consciousness field.
We are all one. We're one. Diversity up here, unity down below.
And so I encourage you to bring your heart into coherency as many times as you can in a day, and to bring coherency to your life and to all the people around you that way, because you influence them through the fields. We know now that we're all connected and that you influence everything around you and outside everywhere in the universe as a whole. So as much as you can, go into coherency and bring that space of coherence and love and understanding and joy and empathy for the world. You're making a huge difference.